So we conclude Pride Month now, but beyond the parades and the posts and the likes, the quiet personal revolution of living truthfully is a must, and the bold act of questioning the systems that only seems to celebrate us when it suits them, that's not all. Brandon Ingram is no stranger to that tension. As an acclaimed author, actor, and an LGBTIQ activist, his work confronts identity not as a slogan, but as a lived experience. He writes, he reflects, he questions, and he challenges us to do the same. And Brandon is on Kaleidoscope Let's Talk today, discussing visibility, silence, and what it means to be who he is. So we've seen Pride Month celebrated everywhere. There's hashtags and all kinds of things happening. But how much of what we see is actually genuine, and how much is corporate rainbow washing?
That it's interesting to watch brand participation, corporate participation in the month, within the month, because I observe to what degree people just seem to be paying lip service to what is going on, and to what degree there's active involvement in changing someone's life or doing something meaningful because you really want to stand by it. May I give you an example? Vaseline in Thailand, I think a few years ago, actually developed a skincare product for transgender women who are moving through the transitioning process, because they identified together with the transgender community that that process and all of the hormones that you end up taking dry your skin in a way that is really very tough to come back from. So I was watching this case study and I was thinking, now see, that is something that you can truly stand by as a someone who represents the brand and say, we did something that was truly meaningful to the community, not just like a full page ad or a Facebook post that says like, Happy Pride Month, we're with you.
You work in the corporate world.
I do.
Have you ever felt complicit in the performative support of the LGBTIQ community? How do you reconcile that with actually working in the corporate world?
One of the things that I'd actually done in my corporate role when I took it over a couple of years ago was to have this sort of guideline put in place to say, we're not going to do any communication that sort of is just a wish post, or that aligns with us doing something for the sake of doing something. Rather, it needs to align with us actually making some kind of meaningful effort towards, is this going to change not just today, not just this month, but from this point onwards to how the community is going to feel, how they're going to respond, and how they're going to interact. Because I think we're living in this world where authenticity is a word that's used everywhere, and I think that it's used so much that it's so fake, right? And if you want to have authentic interactions with the people who are interacting with your brand, who are loyal to it, who keep coming back to it, you must not forget that a huge percentage of that population also belongs to the LGBTQ community. We are, I think, globally more than 10% of the population. So it's important that we show up for us, the community, in ways that is not just some ad. So yeah, I've taken some steps towards doing that. I could be doing more.
We live in a very hyper digital era. How do you strike the balance between being out there, like you said, and also protecting the right to your private life?
I listen to a lot of podcasts and a lot of people who I admire who talk about this kind of thing. And one thing I think I heard maybe Seth Godin say along the way is, why do you end up putting up the kind of material that you end up putting up on your social feeds? And I think intention is very important, right? And if the intention is about likes and comments and validation in that sense, it is a clear representation of the fact that it's not something that you are getting like in real life. But I think that if your intention is actually about talking about body positivity, or talking about same-sex relationships, or talking about the way that something you're doing is shaping culture, in that context, you kind of understand what is important to put out there because you are a part of shaping something, versus putting something out there that is deeply personal to you just because you want the validation.
Do you feel pressure to be an ambassador for your community just because you are out there, because you have come out with your identity?
In a certain way, those of us who do have voice, who have carved out a platform to speak for ourselves and also for the larger community, we should be doing that work. But I think again that should come from an authentic I want to do it place. I believe that the work I'm doing is lived through my life. I want to be seen in the things that I do. I want to be heard in the conversations that I have in this way, which I think to a degree are, for me, impactful in the same way that it might be impactful for someone who cannot do this, perhaps, to be out on the street holding a placard and, protesting in that way. There's different ways to approach activism.
How does our cultural or historical context shape or clash the way you see yourself in Sri Lanka in 2025?
If I were to lean into Sri Lankan origins themselves, then I am not the odd one out. Actually, I am more representative of what this culture used to be before we were colonized. And anyone who does even the most surface level research will find out, the letters that were written by the Portuguese ambassadors who were here during the time of them sussing out the vibe of whether this was a viable option for them to take over and turn into something different that they could use, which then, fell under subsequent colonization. You see these, in the exchange of these letters, they talk about the behavior of the people, and obviously they're appalled by what's going on here, but it was very normal to us because we were a fluid people from a gender point of view, from a sexual identity point of view. We didn't have all of these walls and categorizations and these, stigmas that we kind of deal with today. We were much more fluid before we were told that we couldn't be. And then everyone who told us that we couldn't be went and became fluid and more, and gave into the idea of there being something more in the collective conscious approach of how we view each other as human beings. And we kind of decided that we want to stay stuck in that place that was taught to us before we were who we were.
Do you really think that Western influences actually hindered the whole context of the LGBTIQ community here?
There's a big yes and no behind that. The yes, because I think that as a result of everything that we see, the influence that we have from the West, especially through media, we kind of believe that that's the way to be a part of the community, right? We're not taking into consideration all of the other points of intersection that we need to go through, because there's a difference in being a gay man versus being a gay Sri Lankan man versus being a gay Sri Lankan Sinhalese man or a gay Sri Lankan Tamil man or a gay Sri Lankan Eurasian man such as myself. There are many points of intersection, like there is to being a woman, for instance. Cultural implications and all of the social dynamics that we grow up with differ from region to region, country to country, ethnicity to ethnicity, person to person. And we have just a very broad, highly Americanized on a lot of days, view of what it means to be LGBTQ. And you're like, God, we can't have our children going through that or that happening to them. And so people use terms like LGBTQ agenda. I don't know what the agenda is. It's to be able to live and love whom we want to. The Western influence has kind of made us think it's an outside concept. It's something that's not ours, that's being brought in here. What do we do about this? But if you go really deep into it, and the work I've been doing on myself to a great degree is, how do I be a gay Sri Lankan man? Because I am Sri Lankan, and to me, I think that, the process of courtship, as it would in any other relationship, goes on for a really long time before you even approach the idea of, do we get intimate? I think that's really beautiful. I think that we don't need to follow all of the stuff that the West says for us to follow. So this is why I think Western influence has, not done us justice in the right way. Why I do think it's important is because if all of that stuff hadn't come through, everyone who identified as being part of the community wouldn't have had a reference point to kind of say, oh, that's me too, right? This is my life. I see myself in that. Growing up, people like my dear friend Arun Valandawe Prematilaka, myself, We had no reference points in media of people having this conversation. What we're doing here today, Savithri, allows someone in this country 20 years from now to find this interview and say, that's a reference point of someone who's from here talking about something that I can relate to.
What is the one action, small or large, that each of us can do to get to where you just mentioned?
Be a little more open-minded, I think. The world could just use with a little bit more kindness at every given point, understanding that regardless of what you may have been through or what you think you know, you don't even know the people that you know, right? I function in an organization that is very inclusive, and yet I am the only person that I know that speaks of myself in this way and has no problem talking about my sexual identity. And I know that it is statistically impossible that I am the only one. And that kind of gives you an idea of how even in spaces that are about championing inclusivity, we're probably not doing all that we can to say, I see you, I hear you, I feel for you. I think all of that just boils down to be more empathetic.
Kaleidoscope is on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Do follow, subscribe, and like us for more.